This year will be different.
This year will be different.
This year will be different.
This year, I need to eat less. You know what? I do solemnly swear that this year I will lose 10 pounds. Or at least 5.
5 is the magic number. That's how many times I want to visit my grandmother this year, which would be 5 more than last year.
Learn to wait. I always want things instantly. I need patience. Now, this year I'll
be nicer to my parents. What, Mom? Get off my back. I just
need peace in my life. I'm just so nervous all the time. I'm twitching. 3 kids. I'm a twitcher. I'm twitching. I twitch. I just can't seem to get
my pits to stop sweating. Can you see this? Look, when did I become the human leak? I mean, I know I've got some stress about my future and everything, but why can't I just be like everyone else and you conceal it? Okay, I'll just have to fake it till I make it. And I'll
be better than I've ever been in my entire life.
If I'm going to make this year count, I have to do some things differently. It's toupee time.
Make some goals this year. Just 3, not 10.
Stop judging people who aren't like me.
Stop snapping at my kids.
Dream!
Character over image.
Learn that I'm loved, but not entitled.
God, did you forget about me? I'm here. Just show me what to do.
Give me the strength to change. What am I saying? I don't even know if I want to change, God. I'm comfortable. I have a good life. I know. You want the best for me. So why don't I want the best for me?
Starting tomorrow, using my gifts and talents, I'm going to live my life differently. God's way.
I'm tired of keeping this great gift.
A secret. Can I tell you a secret? I feel like I'm separated from something. That sounds weird, doesn't it? But whatever I need, it's bigger than this world can
offer. I offer my life, God. That's something much more than what I can see. So please, God, would you just take this little bit of faith that I have?
I just can't wait another year.
All right, I decided to go for image over character. What do you think? Yeah? What do you think, honey? I showed Andrea last night. She said, deja vu, creepy, you know. So, all right. So we won't do that. Welcome to 2015. Y'all doing well for the first 4 days of the year? It's been a good year for me so far. And yeah, here's a trivia question for you. How many Christians does it take to change a light bulb? Change? Okay. Nobody gets that. I don't know. I'm just going to, I promised I would dump that last service, but. So, obviously, this series that we're going to be doing is about change. And you might recall, if you're here back September, Brian briefly unpacked something we're calling the 9 elements of Cornerstone. And these 9 elements is our attempt to clearly describe how God has set Cornerstone apart as a very unique congregation, literally in the world. And beginning in February, we're going to highlight one of those 9 elements each month through a variety of communication resources like social media and art in the foyer and short vignettes here up on Sunday mornings. We want to do this so that we can all appreciate what God has been doing in Cornerstone in the past so that we know where he's taking us in the future. And just like everything on this planet can be broken down into the basic chemical building blocks of matter called a periodic table, we believe these 9 elements make up the basic building blocks here at Cornerstone. And we'd like everyone to understand what those building blocks are. So beginning today and going all the way through Easter Sunday, we're going to focus on just one of those 9 elements in a series that we're calling Metamorphosis, a life of transformation. And for us, transformation means positioning ourselves to become whole, healthy followers of Jesus. Metamorphosis is the transformational process, or it's a journey in which something changes in an important and obvious way into something that's very different from what it used to be. I don't know about you, but I went to the gym for the first time in 2015 yesterday, and I went to Louisville Rec Center, and I went running around their second-story track that they have. It was like a freeway in there. How many of you signed up for a gym? I mean, gym memberships just soar the first week of January because people want to change the way they look on the outside. But this series is really about changing how we look on the inside. We all know people who look pretty good on the outside, but not so good on the inside. And you know, the world values outer beauty, but God values inner beauty. Because listen, he knows that inner beauty leads, it produces outer beauty. Jesus once said to some very religious people in Matthew chapter 23, verse 23, he said, you know, you clean the outside of a cup and dish, but inside it's full of greed and self-indulgence. First, clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside will also be clean. And you know, he's not talking here about cleaning cups and dishes, right? This is a metaphor for human transformation. And what I love about this passage is that if we will merely focus on transforming our inner selves, then our outer selves will be transformed as well. It doesn't work the other way around. The world tries to convince us otherwise, but merely looking good on the outside does nothing to transform us on the inside. Botox injections won't cure anxiety disorders. A toned body won't cure a sex addiction. A new suit won't cure an anger problem. These are what I call an inside job. They take place on the inside. People who have become transformed on the inside tend to take better care of themselves. People who have been transformed on the inside tend to take better care of others. And people who have become transformed on the inside tend to take better care of the environments that they live in. When we transform on the inside, the outside transforms as well. And in this passage, Jesus is particularly offended by cover-ups who merely transform on the outside, but it's all a facade to either seek human praise or to conceal a behavior or even to prosper materially. Romans 12:2 says it this way. It says that we shouldn't conform to the pattern of the world, a world that is obsessed with the outside, but that we should be transformed by the renewing of our minds. In other words, on the inside, because then and only then will we be able to test and approve what God's will is for us, how he wants us to live, what he wants us to do with our lives. So many people, particularly young people, college students from CU, come and they ask me, I just don't know what to do with my life. I don't know what God's will is for my life. And I always say, don't focus on God's will. Focus on inner transformation. If you can focus on inner transformation, then you will know God's perfect will for your lives. That's how he reveals it, when we put ourselves in environments where we change. And so metamorphosis, the transformational journey of changing in an important and obvious way into something that is very different, is what we're going to focus on for the next 14 weeks. And the target of this change, the goal of this transformational journey, is to map out a path that leads to us becoming more like Jesus. We want to give you a roadmap that will create an environment for real and lasting change. And the target we are aiming for is to be mature followers of Jesus. Rabbi Saul said in Colossians chapter 1, verse 28-29, he said, Yeshua, Jesus, is the one we proclaim, admonishing and teaching everyone with all wisdom. And here's the reason, so that we may present everyone fully mature in the Messiah. To this goal, I strenuously contend with all the energy Christ so powerfully works in me. It was his ambition to do this. So Jesus is the target. And let me add something so important. That the Jesus we are aiming for must be the real historical Jesus and not the Jesus who's been rebranded by revisionist history over the last 2,000 years. Let me explain what I mean. Initially, at its start, 2,000 years ago, Christianity was made up of Jewish and non-Jewish believers, followers of Jesus, and they were worshiping side by side, firmly connected to their Jewish roots and to a Jewish Jesus. But over the next few centuries, as the center of Christianity left Jerusalem and shifted to Rome, a very anti-Jewish attitude entered into the church. And when the Roman Empire Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire in 380 AD, religion and politics mixed together in Christianity for the first time, and Christianity made a sharp and devastating departure from its rich Jewish heritage to a very Romanized, un-Jewish version of Christianity that became influenced by many of the pagan practices of the Roman Empire that still remain largely to this day. It also made a sharp departure from a Middle Eastern Jewish Messiah named Yeshua, who taught and lived all of his life from a Jewish perspective, to a very blue-eyed, blonde European Gentile Messiah who lost almost all of his connection to his Jewish roots. Oy. During this time in history, listen to this. It's important to know, if you know, a lot of people in here have heard this story before, but if you don't know this, you need to know this. Every Jew knows what I'm about to tell you. Most Christians don't know. During this time in history, observing or teaching anything remotely Jewish, so observing Shabbat, celebrating the Passover, eating kosher foods, anything like that, became banned within Christianity and oftentimes within Judaism as well, and often under penalty of death. And for the next 1,700 years, Christianity would become very disconnected from its Jewish roots and from a Jewish Messiah. But here's what's really cool. We live in interesting times, really interesting times, because over the last 50 years, seriously, only 50 years, and particularly in the last decade, there has been a reformation of epic proportion of Christians rediscovering, reclaiming the importance of their rich Jewish heritage that can only be attributed to a powerful and timely movement of God and Cornerstone. Here at Cornerstone, we've been on the leading edge of that Reformation. This Reformation really began with a revival that took place in the late 60s called the Jesus Movement. Anybody meet Jesus in the 60s? Come on, raise your hand if you did. I want to know. All right, very cool. And I had a chance, but I missed it. It took me about another decade before I'd have another chance, but I knew all about that movement. And once these, and it was really made up of discouraged hippies who were now looking for answers. And so by the hundreds of thousands, people turned to Jesus in the late 60s and early 70s. And a lot of those hippies were Jews. And once these Jewish hippies began to read, they opened up their New Testaments, they as Jews, they could clearly see that the context and the teachings of the New Testaments was very Jewish. I mean, it's written by Jewish authors, right? And also very powerful when understood in its original Jewish context. And since then, there have been dozens, literally dozens and dozens of books and articles written about rediscovering the richness of our Jewish heritage and reclaiming the Jewishness of Jesus. One of the authors that we love here quite a bit at Cornerstone is Lois de Verberg. She's written 3 books now. This is her 3rd book. This one's called Walking in the Dust of the Rabbi. And she's written one called Sitting at the Feet of Rabbi Jesus, and then there's one that's more of a devotional. It takes about 50 words or so, Hebrew words, and it talks about their deeper meanings. Lois is not Jewish. She grew up in a devout Lutheran home, and hang on one second. But about 15 years ago, after traveling to Israel and beginning to wonder a little bit more about the cultural context of the Bible, she began to study and teach the Bible in a more cultural, Jewish cultural setting. And she began to find answers to questions that really bothered her, things that just didn't make sense in the New Testament. And also, she found many insights that deepened her faith. And since then, she's devoted her life to writing books and articles and speaking on this subject. Here's what she says in the introduction of this book. She says, "As I entered the world of Jewish thought, I began to wonder about the faith of Jesus. I struggled to understand what I should learn from the accounts of how he lived. Was it simply to explain why he must die? Or was his life a pattern to be understood and emulated? And what did it mean to imitate him in my walk with God? As I explored the Bible lands and the cultures of the Bible, I realized that I did indeed need to have," listen to this, "not only faith in Jesus, but also to understand the faith of Jesus. To be a disciple of Jesus, I needed to know why and how he lived out his faith so that I could follow him more closely." And then Focus on the Family. Most of you are familiar with that ministry. Believe it or not, Focus on the Family sponsors a man named Ray Vanderland. He is also a non-Jewish believer, but he has this website called followtherabbi.com. I recommend you get on that website and explore it as much as you can. Here's a screenshot of describing his philosophy. And he says, under the philosophy, says his tagline is, "Jesus lived like a Jew, Jesus talked like a Jew, and Jesus walked like a Jew." My guess, Jesus was a Jew. I think it means something to Ray. I know it means something to Ray. And Ray's, on that website, you can find a plethora of videos and teachings of Ray in Israel or in other Bible land areas, connecting the dots of our faith to its Jewish heritage. There's virtually, really, an endless amount of resources on this subject today. But here's something that's even more interesting than the Reformation that's been taking place in the last 50 years in Christianity. There's been the same kind of Reformation taking place during the same time period within Judaism itself. Most people don't know this, but it's just absolutely amazing. Believe it or not, in this same time period, around 50 years or so, Jews all around the world have been waking up to the realization that Christianity and Jesus have Jewish roots, and that has become very important to them recently. And many have been writing books and articles and lecturing on subjects reclaiming Jesus as one of their own. For instance, respected Jewish author and historian Pinchas Lapid, who is an amazing guy who lived in the 1922 and died in 1927. He's written several books on the Jewishness of Jesus. You can find him on Google Books if you want to read some of his stuff. But one of his books, titled Brother and Lord, he writes this. He says, "I want to say just one last word on Jesus and the Torah and his attitude to all the commandments, from the least to the greatest. He gives a wonderful example of the slightest, that is, the teaching of the tithe of dill and of the mint. There is certainly nothing smaller, and of the greatest commandment, the teaching of the twofold love, to love your neighbor and to love God. On both he says all that he has to say in a splendid sentence in Matthew 23:23, and he quotes the passage, "You ought to do one without neglecting the other." But then he ends this by saying, "No rabbi whom I know could have put it better." I mean, this is amazing. In 2010, an Israeli Orthodox rabbi living in Israel, his name is Shlomo Rishkin, he made a YouTube video, and on that YouTube video, he praised Jesus, and he called him Rabbi Jesus, and it brought him a lot of criticism from the Jewish Orthodox community. But then a Jewish reporter from the Jewish Chronicle wrote in response to his criticism, said this, "Until recently, most Jews have chosen not to think of Jesus at all. Surely at a minimum, Jewish education should include learning that Jesus and his family would have been Torah observant, kept Shabbat, circumcised their males, attended synagogue, observed purity laws in relation to childbirth and menstruation, kept kosher, and so on. Because the words and deeds of Jesus the Jew have been and are an inspiration to countless millions of men and women, it is well overdue for Jews to give a little more attention to the life and teaching of this outstanding Jew. David Laszlo is a rabbi in Ashland, Oregon. He just published a book called Jesus, First Century Rabbi. This is it. Here's what it says. It says, this bold, fresh look at the historical Jesus and the Jewish roots of Christianity challenges both Jews and Christians to re-examine their understanding between the two religions. Rabbi Zaslow explains how the concepts of vicarious atonement, mediation, incarnation, and Trinity are actually rooted in classical Judaism. Well, yeah, that's where we get it from too, buddy. Okay. And then one more. Rabbi Zalman Zochner Shalomi actually lived here in Boulder, just passed away just a few months ago. He said this. He says he believed that Jesus is what we Jews call a Jewish tzaddik. A Jewish tzaddik is a person of unusual righteousness who serves as a bridge between his community and God and exemplifies Jewish virtue. Rabbi Zalman described Jesus as, get this, the Torah incarnate. Yes. In other words, Zalman believes that Jesus' life personified how to love God and how to love others in radical ways that the Torah intended. Amazing. Now, we got to, it's a huge step to go from there to he is the Messiah, he is the Lord, but these two reformations are incredible. And of course, we know from John 1:14 that it confirms, it says what? The word Yeshua, Jesus, became flesh. The word became flesh. The Torah became incarnate, God incarnate, and made his dwelling among us. The word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Jesus is God in human flesh. And if we want to know how God intended for us to live as humans, then we must look to God in human flesh as our example. And when God walked on earth as a human, he didn't come as a blue-eyed blonde European who had no connection to the Jewish story. He came as a Middle Eastern Jew whose life was directed by the Torah to love God and the rest of humanity with all of his being. As Louis de Verberg says in her introduction, we must not only aim for faith in Jesus, but also for the faith of Jesus. And just to be clear, so that you don't go away misunderstanding what I'm trying to say, this does not mean that the goal of transformation is for all of us to morph into Torah-observant Jews. That is not the goal. The goal is for us to morph into human beings who love God and love others with the same intentionality and intensity that Jesus had. And so over the next 14 weeks, we're going to map out a path that will ultimately lead to becoming more like Yeshua. But here's the problem. The problem is that all of us have roadblocks that keep us from doing that. Things we bump into that stop us dead in our tracks. Whatever those things are. And these are roadblocks that we must overcome. And so goal number 2 in this series is to provide an opportunity to overcome our challenges. Raise your hand if you have any challenge. Anybody here have challenges? Oh, good. First service was only 5 hands. Yeah, I forgive them because, they are sleepy. Actually, first service is usually the most awake service because they're all morning people, right? How do morning people get up? I know how morning people get up. Boom. Your feet hit the floor because I'm a morning person. We must be able to overcome these roadblocks. Now, how would it sit with you if I told you that God had to overcome a roadblock in his life? Listen to this. Hebrews 5:7-9 says, during the days of Jesus' life on earth, He offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverent submission. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered, and once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. Anything in that passage that tweaks your theology just a little bit? It should, by the way. Jesus learned obedience. Wait, let's just stop. Let's just back up. Jesus learned. I mean, I get the fact that he came as a baby, so he had to learn to walk, he had to learn to talk, there's a lot of things he had to learn, but Jesus learned obedience. Jesus learned obedience from what he suffered. Jesus learned obedience from what he suffered, and then once made perfect, he became the source of eternal life for all of us. You see, listen, God came to earth as a human being to atone for our sins. He left the comfort of heaven. He was born in a dirty stable, in the lowest form that you could come. A naked human being in a really dirty place. But now, all grown up and 33 years old, on the night before Jesus would be crucified, he goes to a garden to pray, a garden located on the Mount of Olives across the Kidron Valley, just from the Temple Mount. And he went there after a Passover Seder, when he said, "This is my body, this bread is my body, this blood is this cup is my blood spilled out for you." So he knew what he was supposed to do. He knew what he had to do, and he goes to this garden to pray. But he's stressed. I mean, he's really stressed out about the whole thing. And when he gets there, he prays something like, "Dad, I got to be honest with you. I don't want to do this. I don't want to. There's got to be another way. Let's do this another way. I don't want to do this. But even so, not your will, not my will, but your will be done." And he is so stressed out about not wanting to do what he knows he's supposed to do, what he came to earth to do, that he prays this prayer 3 times and actually sweats drops of blood from the pores of his skin because he is so stressed out about it. He doesn't want to do it. Seemed like a good idea in heaven. But now that I'm down here in the form of a vulnerable and frail human being who feels pain and feels real fear, I don't want to do it. And this daunting challenge seems impossible to overcome. And Jesus is offering up prayers and tears and even blood because he's struggling to do what he knows he's supposed to do. Has that ever been your problem? Yeah. Hourly. Aren't you glad we have a God who had to wrestle with something? There's no other God. There's no other faith that has a God like this. Aren't you glad we have a God who, because he had to wrestle with something, understands the things that we wrestle with? There's no other God like this. Aren't you glad that we have a God who overcame his challenges? Jesus learned obedience from what he suffered. meaning that this decision was no easy decision to make. And this moment, my friends, as important as the crucifixion and the resurrection are, this moment in my mind is the most important moment in history. Everything turns one way or the other on his decision in that garden. And in this moment, God, in real time, not in theoretical time, God will learn to understand how to empathize with our human weaknesses and struggles in life. And in this moment, we can find courage and the power we will need to overcome the weaknesses that we all struggle with. Because if God in human flesh can overcome his greatest moment of weakness and struggle, then it's possible for us to overcome ours as well. He paved the way. Now you think I might just be puffing heretical smoke here. Listen, Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15 and 16 says it this way. Speaking of Jesus as the ultimate high priest. You know what the high priest used to do? The high priest would accept the offerings of people. And you do it day in and day out. It becomes kind of routine, and you lose connection with the emotion that the people are coming. I need to be forgiven. Yeah. Here's your, come on, give me your lamb, give me your dove. There's not much empathy going on there, right? It's a job. But Hebrews 4:15 says, we don't have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses. But we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are. How have you been tempted in your life? I mean, think of one way you've been tempted in your life. And Jesus was tempted that way, yet. He did not sin. He conquered that. And because of that, we can approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us when? In our time of need. God learned something about empathy by coming to earth. It's crazy. But I like it. It's a God you can relate to. He gets us. And so as the worship team comes up, by way of application, I'd like you just to think about one challenge you have going on in your life that needs to be conquered. Just one, all right? Well, how about a minimum of one? I've got a few, but it would be nice just to get one of them done over the next 14 weeks. Each week we will remind you that this is what we're after. To ask God to conquer these things in our lives. And this series will conclude on, which I think is highly powerful and relevant, on Easter Sunday. And I will talk more about this last section, about a God who came to suffer on Easter Sunday. It'll be like a sandwich. So for the next 12 weeks, we'll be talking about this roadmap. But think about that, will you? Just think about that one thing. And then I'd like to end this time by presenting the communion table. I mean, you think about it. This is probably the greatest picture we have of the reality that Jesus pushed through that challenge. We're here today. Thank God, we're here today because Jesus decided to do what he came to earth to do. It was not an easy decision. And when you come forward and you take the bread and you take the cup, think about that. This was agony for him. It was agony to be on that cross. The worst agony of it all was to be, for the first time ever in eternity past to that moment, to be separated from the Father. It's the worst of it. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Where are you? I've always known you. Where are you? And so to come up here and take the cup and take the bread and take it back to your seat, let's do it together, all right? we've got some time for that. We're going to do some worship, and when everybody's come and taken the elements and gone back to your seat, you don't have to come down, by the way. Don't feel pressured to come down, but everyone is invited to come down and join in on this. So let's stand up. Ushers will dismiss you row by row.